Welcome to Recovery Live today. This event is brought to you by the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration's Bringing Recovery Supports to Scale, Technical Assistance Center Strategy, otherwise known as Brass Tacks. Our TA Center is dedicated to increasing access to recovery supports, and we achieve this work through a variety of mechanisms, including a lot of technical assistance focused on systems transformation and developing the capacity of peer-run recovery community and family and youth-led organizations. So I'm Stephen Samra. I'm a Deputy Director with the SAMHSA Brass Tacks Project. And folks, we are really fortunate to have some amazing presenters with us today. And they're going to go over some general information around recovery housing and talk a little bit more about how really to implement quality standards into residences. So I am really pleased to introduce today's presenters, and today we have Wendy Doolittle, who is the CEO at McKinley Hall in Ohio, Beth Fisher-Sanders, the CEO of Hope Homes Recovery Services in Georgia and elsewhere, and Daryl Mitchell, CEO at the Progress House in Indiana. I'm going to turn everything over to those folks very shortly, but first I got just a few housekeeping items with all of you. Now, Recovery Live events are different from usual webinars because here you get to engage directly with our presenters and each other through the live chat box, and we're going to have a few audience poll questions that are coming up. There should be one up on the screen in front of you now, and I hope you'll take a moment and just let us know who's with us. As we move along, the presenters are going to share some of their initial thoughts, and then we're going to answer some questions that you've raised during this event. So you're going to see a lot of movement in this room, and we hope that you will find it energizing and exciting, and we encourage you to, absolutely join in on the chat as you see fit. You can share your questions and comments throughout the event, and audience members are always in a listen-only mode, but they can submit questions by typing them into the questions and comment box. Now, if you experience any technical difficulties, please request assistance in that same box because there's tech support are watching those comments right now, and they'll respond to the needs really quickly. We also have several resources to this topic available for download from the resources box. To make that happen, you just highlight the name of the document. The download button will light up on the bottom right side of the box. Click that button, and the document will automatically be sent to your computer. Now, often our audience members share links to their own favorite resources in the chat box. This event is being recorded, and that recording link will be shared with every registrant after this event. So you'll really be able to review and the chat again, rewatch the presenters, whatever you want using that link. Today's session is going to last about 1 hour. If, as you are listening to this content, you feel your organization may need some technical assistance around this or any other topic, please copy the link for our online TA request form from the instructions box. As people were arriving today, mentioned earlier, we posted a poll question for all of you to answer because we're interested in knowing who's here. So let's take a quick look at who is actually here today. So we've got about 25% of folks are identifying as people in recovery. We've got some great recovery coach and peer specialists on board. We've got about 17, almost 18% that qualify as treatment providers. There's another about 15% around recovery providers. Got a smattering of case managers here. It's great to see the recovery housing operators. It's about 18, 19%. I'm really excited to see program directors and CEOs as well. That's, again, about 18%. And those are really important just because those are the folks who can really, kind of help us with decision making, right? Lovely to see funders on here, about 5%. We've got some clinicians joining us, about 19 or 20 clinicians. Thank you. Some policymakers on board as well. Again, that's another really important one, especially around this topic. Nice to see some educators and researchers on the line as well, about 5% for each of them. So we have this is a really diverse group of people. I think that, there's a lot to get out of this event. And I think there's going to be something for everybody. So before we jump in, the style of today's event is really dependent on the kind of participation that comes from you. You're going to see a couple more polls that come up in the room. Again, we encourage you to participate. And then when we close this room, a satisfaction survey is going to automatically open in your internet browser. We all really appreciate you taking just a couple minutes to complete the survey, because we want the good, the bad, and the ugly. If we don't know that we're doing something that, you know, just isn't working well with all of you and nobody tells us, we'll never change that. So we really pay attention to those surveys, and I encourage you to, you know, take the moment to, you know, to fill it out. It'll help us do a job a lot better. And with that, I'm going to get us underway, and I'm going to turn this over to Wendy. Wendy, can you kick us off, please?
Absolutely. Welcome, everyone, and thank you for participating. I have to take a few minutes here just to kind of go over some of the concept of recovery residences and kind of what that's about. If I use NAR's definition, recovery residences are sober, safe, and healthy living environments where residents are more likely to achieve recovery from substance use. And the houses, recovery residences are designed to assist people so that they serve in the transition to independent, productive, and meaningful lives of their own choosing. So we understand kind of from that why there's a continuum on different types of housing services that are available based on individuals. The whole concept of recovery residences is rooted in the social model of recovery. So when we say that, we understand that treatment is kind of, it's something where professionals help people to recover, but we understand that drug use is only half of the problem when we're talking about the housing portion of addiction. So recovery is the way of life. It's not a single event. It's kind of the life journey requiring capital recovery to sustain it. And then we talk about just housing in general, which is our basic need for everybody. A roof over our heads, hot water, functional restroom and kitchen, those kinds of things. But when you think of recovery housing, it kind of sits right in the midst of that, because it not only speaks to the physical structure, but it helps take it one step further. It's the supports within the house connecting to an individual, to their community to enhance their supports. So it belongs on the continuum, if you will, is an additional layer or step that's needed. And this additional layer, it's what's in the house to promote recovery. All houses don't promote recovery, which is not a bad thing, but when we speak of this population, we need an environment where recovery is promoted. So the way the social model of recovery is used here, we think about recovery-oriented systems of care. And that's connecting people to the community and the resources needed in the community. And then there's the layer of peers that happens inside the house, and additionally on the outside as a role model and as the person who can kind of help facilitate and connect. And as a result of that, there's empowerment and hope for the individual that's seeking recovery. So just in a nutshell, we can see that recovery residences are kind of an additional layer of what an average person would need, if you will, for housing. So on the next slide, what is going on with all the different names? So there's Recovery House, Oxford House, Sober House. There's all these different names. And for one, it's because housing in this arena has evolved quite a bit over the years. And what we've learned over time is that there are different types of housing needed for different individuals. So this field has really worked hard to design housing based on the needs identified for the individual. And so for an example, how do we know this? Ohio has a unique system where we have, since 2016, we have tracked individuals living in certified recovery houses. So we have about 1,407 surveys that have been done. And based on the data that we've been able to pull out from those surveys, it gives us a better idea of what people are looking for and what they need as they enter recovery. And today you'll get that opportunity to get to hear about the different levels of recovery. So when we think about all the different names, we're really, you know, at the end of the day, regardless of the name you call it, there's still peer support, it's home-like, there are quality standards related to administration and operations, property and architect, and then being a good neighbor. So regardless of the levels and the doses of treatment or support, you still have those basic necessities there. So on my next slide here, we talk about just what is it, some of the comparisons. So I just selected permanent supportive housing, but it could be any other type of housing. And it's all good on that continuum. So recovery housing, number one, there's congregate living. You don't have that when you have your independent house. There's no one in your house to tell you when your chores need to be done or what time you have to be home, that there's a meeting in the morning. So there are lots of components inside of a recovery house that support the individual who's seeking recovery. So you basically, in essence, have bolstered that house in such a way that the supports are built in. People early in recovery kind of struggle. When you go home, you don't necessarily want to sit by yourself. It's not the best place, if you will. So that congregate living gives you the support inside of the house, and it gives you the structure that you need. Drug screening. It's not something that would happen if you were living independently. Drug screening is a positive thing for people that live in structured housing and recovery in a recovery residence because it helps us to keep the house safe. A drug screen that shows that someone has relapse doesn't necessarily equal the discharge. It equals an intervention, another layer of support. And then there's policies and procedures to make sure that all recovery residences are following these standards the same way, and that the core of making it a facility where there's recovery capital being built is happening in every recovery house. And then let me take a moment and ask, there's a poll that popped up. I see everyone's taking care of that now, so I'll hit that as soon as I finish this last slide here that talks about different needs. And when we look at folks in recovery, I mean, the biggest similarity is they're all on the continuum and all the housing is needed. So when you're looking at congregate living versus independent living, people in recovery that are living in recovery residences, at some point, they're going to want to move to that independent living phase. It's that piece that we need prior to their moving there and that level of support as you bolster and empower them to get to that place. There's no length of stay because it's all individualized based on how people move through that continuum and what they feel their dose of treatment or their dose, of support is needed. That's how that piece is determined. Supportive services are not suggested, but they're required, only because we recognize now, after such evolution, that we understand what is required for people in terms of needing that level of stability, whichever would fit that individual. And then lastly, taking a look at prior conditions for admission. It doesn't matter if you're coming from a treatment facility, if you're coming from jail, oftentimes as a result of a crime that was committed due to being an active addiction. So when you're looking at what got me here, you may live in an environment that has the roof over your head, the hot water, and the functioning restrooms and kitchens, but maybe it's not sober. And so for that reason, it's not an environment that promotes recovery. So prior conditions don't necessarily dictate whether or not you can access a supportive recovery house that is designed to build a lot of the internal and external resources that you need to sustain recovery. And then lastly, as I've spoken before, the removal piece or referral. A relapse doesn't indicate that. Those aren't grounds necessarily for removal. It's grounds to indicate maybe there's more support needed to be added. So on that, having taken a look here, do people seeking recovery housing have the same needs as people in poverty-seeking housing? And 16% said, 12% said yes, 84% said no. And you're right, the needs are very different. You have very different needs when you think about folks coming into early recovery or whatever stage of recovery they might be at, as opposed to just needing the physical structure of a good quality house in which you'd want to live in. So at this point, that concludes my part. I'm going to turn it back over to Steve.
Fantastic, Wendy, and thank you. There was a ton of information in that. That was great. I'm going to turn this over to Beth and let her take it away, Beth.
So I'm talking about standards and ethics, and I'm glad to see so many people, a lot of people I know. Thanks. Shout out to all of you. You know who you are. Standards are really the foundation of everything the National Alliance of Recovery Residences does. And it starts with the different types of recovery residences. Wendy identified the different types and names that we have for recovery residences, and NAR has broken them down into 4 intuitive levels, is what we call, of recovery residences, or 4 levels of residential support. So that was the first thing that NAR did, was name recovery residences, break it down into the different types of levels, which I'll explain, and establish a national standard. What does that standard do? Well, first of all, it gives us a universal language, because when we first came on the scene together, all people from across the country trying to figure out our different languages, it was like the Tower of Babel. So we have this universal language now that allows us to understand each other. And it also allows us to translate across the states, where in California, sober living is the predominant term and way of operating, whereas in Georgia, it's really about recovery residences at more of a level 3. Also, a national alliance allows us to have a universal knowledge base. We can tap into each other's wisdom in a social model kind of way that's really invigorating and exciting. We share our collection of best practices, and we've done that. We're now going into our third iteration of the national standard. That's a good reason to come to the national conference, by the way. It will be introduced at that national conference. Right now we're operating in version 2 that was introduced in 2015. We also have a basis for researchers to study us in this universal approach through the National Alliance. And of course, the certification program raises the bar on professionalism. Yes, we are a part of the continuum of support and even the continuum of care at level 4. That makes us an integral piece of recovery with a capital R, help in a recovery that really helps people. Next slide, please. So the 4 levels, very simply, again, they are intuitive. Our level 1 is what we call a peer-based, peer-run recovery residence. The best example, most commonly known example of a level 1 is Oxford House. Most of us are familiar with Oxford houses, which are entirely peer-based. No staff oversight, democratically run. And for people with a high amount of stability, physically, psychologically, and socially. Level 2 is referred to as a monitored level, and that's where you'll have a senior resident manager overseeing things. There's a schedule, there's a lot of rules, a meeting requirement, self-help requirement. And again, this is for somebody who has some motivation for recovery, who is established somewhat in recovery, maybe a little bit of time, but there is also that oversight to provide support and structure. Level 3 builds on those first 2 levels, and it's a supervised level where you're seeing a higher degree of structure, perhaps life skills groups, almost always some kind of life skill support, maybe with some more certifications or degrees amongst the staff. So it's more, not better, but more. And level 4 is a service provider where in every state you have to have a license to provide this level of support. It can be thought of as a treatment level of support. The commonality in all of these levels, though, is the social model, that community secret sauce element where we facilitate residents mixing it up with each other. Community is everything in social model. And then, of course, housing is the common element amongst all 4 levels. There's a lot more we can say, but we have got a lot of information, so we'll move to the next slide. This is an older document, but it's still a well-received one. It's a nice summary of those 4 levels and what is provided at each of those levels, what the staffing elements look like and how they vary at each of the levels, what different types of residences might look like. Not a lot of variance there as in terms of residence, but all 4 levels can encompass all 4 types of recovery residences. Services, it's building on the service level with each level, and an administrative hierarchy tends to be more developed as you increase in level. So just a little more of a guide to what's offered at each of the levels. Next slide, please. So this is an overview of what you'll find in version 2 right now. Version 3, about to be introduced, is not far off from this. You've still got 4 domains that address an administrative, operational domain. The recovery support domain is about what happens in that residence, how we use social model. The architectural domain or facilities domain is how we upkeep our residences, and then our good neighbor domain, how we interact with the community around us. So that is our aspects of the standard. Version 2 has 37 standards under these domains, and version 3 will have 31 standards. We've tried to simplify version 3, make it a little more user-friendly for both operators and site visitors. And then I'll call your attention to our poll and move to the last slide. So the aspects to consider, next slide please. The aspects to consider when you're looking at the different levels of recovery residences are first recovery capital. And what we mean by that is all of the assets and resources that somebody brings to help sustain, cement recovery, establish recovery. How strong is their recovery capital? How much family support, financial support? Those are examples of recovery capital. Motivation is an internal example. And then another variable to consider, oh, good gravy, I can't even see the variables. I'm sorry. The disease severity is how progressed in my addiction. I need to consider that. If I'm more progressed in my addiction, I will probably need a higher level to start. All of these we have to consider person-driven choice. That it's the individual that needs to collaborate with referents, with service providers to assess the level that's appropriate for them. So that said, we have our pool of is NAR level 4 housing better than levels 1, 2, and 3. And you all are absolutely correct. 76% of you answered no, it is not better. It's different. The levels provide different resources and have different things to offer at each one, and we enter into each one at the level that's appropriate given all of the variables in front of us.
All right. Beth, I'm just making sure that you have concluded your presentation.
Yes.
Fantastic, fantastic. And Beth, thank you. There was somebody just put in the chat box here. Can we get a hard copy of the slides? This is great. Can't type fast enough. And as you were talking, Beth, and I was watching your slides come through, I'm thinking, oh my gosh, there is a ton of fantastic information. Let's have Daryl close us out with his presentation. Daryl, take it away, my friend.
Thank you, Steve. It's good to be with everybody today. I wanted to talk a little bit about some of the things that you can anticipate in your market once standards are implemented and you have houses that are reviewed and certified to the NAR standard. Similar to recovery, before standards were often driven by fear of the unknown. There's a stigma around recovery houses. The terms that were used early in the presentation, they're not all created equal. So the levels allow us to identify different levels of care, but once somebody is accredited and certified by a third party, then the marketplace, which includes consumers, legislators, referral agents, all become more acceptable to the notion of recovery housing and see it as an evidence-based practice, which it is. Neighbors oftentimes, or if you would ask somebody if they think this is a good idea to have recovery housing, people would often say yes, but then they often say, but not in my backyard, because the perception is that there's going to be needles in the front yard, drug dealers standing out on the corner, and basically bringing down the quality of life in their particular neighborhood and the value of their real estate. After standards in place, what we see is that we can show via research that actually a recovery house that's operated to a level of one of the 4 standards are good neighbors. One of the things people don't understand today is that most of us live next door to an alcoholic or somebody suffering from addiction. But when you live next to a recovery home or a recovery home is in your neighborhood, you're living next to somebody that has that chronic disease that they put it in remission by the process of recovery. So it's a critical component of a recovery-oriented systems of care in order for people in your particular area and or state to get well. If you're trying to get started, some of the questions that often come up will be, is the NAR standard, there's concern that the NAR standard would imply that Big Brother is watching me and they're going to change my programming. The NAR standard is there primarily to identify quality of care and to ensure that you do what you say you do as a recovering house operator. So if you run a faith-based program or a 12-step program, NAR is it's not biased towards either one of those. We just want to verify that whatever pathway to recovery you're claiming in the marketplace is in fact the one that you're offering. So it does support multiple pathways to recovery. Part of the process of being able to be successful in your marketplace is going to have to be the education of stakeholders. So there are a lot of people that can impact and negatively or positively and support the recovery house movement in your area. Everything from other operators, so they need to understand the benefit of being a certified house to a national standard, policymakers obviously, and then those consumers or the resident, those people that potentially would be residents. So there's a lot of states. We currently have 28 states across the country that benefit from the implementation of these standards. And I would say that we actually have a recovery house movement that's taking place. The fact that we're having this conversation today, the recovery house operators have been invited to the table with other treatment providers along the continuum of care, which allows us to be part of the problem, part of the solution versus part of the problem. One of the other ways for you to discuss the need in your particular market, I just did some math when we were launching NR in Indiana. So all the experts tell us that 10% of the population suffer from substance use disorders. So in Indiana, for example, and you can do this for your state, we have 6.6 million people, which implies that there's 660,000 that could benefit from treatment and or recovery support services. Recovery housing is a recovery support service. If just 10% of that number, because not everybody asks for help at the same time or at all, but if just 10% of that number could benefit from a place in a recovery house and those services, the implication in my state would be that we would need 66,000 beds. And when we did inventory initially, we discovered we had 1,500. And of our 90 counties, 67 counties were without beds. So we were only serving 2% of the population of those that we thought would need this service. So it's important to frame that conversation because we're in the middle of a transformative epidemic to have conversations that allow us to offer transformative solutions. So we have to understand some facts going in. This is just a summary of some of the things that helped us in Indiana, and one of the major pieces was going out and visiting places like Ohio and Massachusetts where they had some success with a state affiliate being put in and the implementation of standards. And in my state, Governor Pence was asked to go to Washington, and I was doing work with his administration, and I realized that when an administration leaves, so does your relationships. So if you were able to work legislatively, with some of your policymakers and influence the passing of a law, then there's a greater likelihood of you gaining some traction. So my encouragement is look at states that have been successful having legislation passed and have that be part of your bailiwick. I'll turn it back over to Steve.
Daryl, thank you. And it was just really shocking to look at the math that you did on the number of beds. I think that's a really great way, I think, to bring to the attention of stakeholders in your community the need, right? Just the overwhelming need and really the dearth of resources that we have available for that need. So that was fantastic, Daryl. Thank you. Folks, I want to jump right into the Q&A here. We've got about 25 minutes to look at some questions. And the very first one I'm going to direct to Wendy. And Wendy, I always think about this in terms of sort of almost cultural competence, but can you talk a bit about how implementing quality standards has affected the way that McKinley Hall meets the needs of women in early recovery and housing?
Oh, sure. So I think when we think about quality standards, we think of those 4 pots kind of identified by NAR, which is administration, services, residents, and staff. So I think for me, when I think of quality standards just for the women, I'm thinking about services, how that house is run. I guess an example might be if you have a house with women and children. So you've got congregate living, a few women, say 3, and then maybe you've got 5 children. And what the quality standards allow is, number 1, those life development skills that happen on site. So now you're able to teach some of those things to the women in the moment, in that environment in which they live. But you're also infusing peer support and role modeling along with the case management pieces for, getting the kids to school, working with the treatment facility. What time do our services start compared to what time do those kids have to be at school? So there's things that we've been able to do, even connected from the residents with the treatment facility, to make sure that we can enhance the quality of living for women and their children by adhering to making sure, the clinical services match, and that what we're providing in the house allows those women to have a more fluid day as they try to parent differently in early recovery, if that makes sense.
That was great, Wendy. Thank you for that. And I'm just going to check in with Beth and Daryl. Any follow-up or additional comments, folks?
I think Wendy gave a great summary. I can't enhance that.
I agree.
Fantastic. Fantastic, folks. Okay, then I will move on, and Wendy, thank you. There's a lot of questions, folks. So let me pose this one. How should recovery houses deal with NIMBYism, especially if there's legislative interest concerns about this type of housing? And I'm just opening that up to all 3 of you.
So my organization has operated for 22 years, and we've experienced it both at the local, NIMBYism that is, at both the local level and in our immediate neighborhoods. And I think our standard helps to inform residents as how to interact in the neighborhoods to be a good neighbor. There's a whole section of the standard about being a good neighbor and how to do that. Then as far as our local governments, which is where most of the NIMBYism occurs, don't fly under the radar is the best advice I can give. We are a profession. Recovery residence operators are a profession that we can operate professionally and be proud of what we do. We don't have to hide any longer. And if we engage with our legislators to talk about what we do, talk about the success stories that we have. We can ally with those government officials. They can actually be advocates for us.
And just to add to that, I mean, I briefly mentioned all of the data that we've collected, Ohio Recovery Housing has collected in the state of Ohio. And one way to combat NIMBYism is that we tell our story. We don't allow someone else to tell it that don't know someone that doesn't know our story. And so we use that data then to explain all the benefits and all of the positive outcomes and what changes happen as a result for people that stay in good quality recovery houses. So I think that's where we also have to focus on. It's making sure we collect the data and tell our story.
Beth and Wendy, that was great. Daryl, any additional comments?
No, I think one of the things that's been successful for us is that we're able to meet with local legislators and local leaders. So if there's a particular market where that's a concern, then we want to go and educate and talk about success in other areas. You know, so the county commissioners, the city council, the mayor, you know, leaders in the recovery community, the healthcare community. Those are the folks who are making decisions about what's happening in their community. And I think if you take a solution-based approach to, I've found that they're looking for ways to find properties that would make sense and make all the parties okay. So it takes some work, but it's always worth the effort.
That was great. That was great. Thank you, guys. All right, here comes another question. How do you require certification and oversight of recovery homes without violating the ADA or FHA?
You want to answer that, Beth?
I'm thinking of the best language to. They're two different realms, really. We, as recovery residence providers, do serve a preferred population. So they are protected under ADA. This is not my my best area. Daryl, do you have any more to add to that from the NAR viewpoint?
So I see a question about MAT. Steve, so the question is around, can you repeat the question one more time, please?
Sure. How do you require certification and oversight of recovery homes without violating the ADA or FHA?
Okay, so around the American Disabilities Act, I mean, what that speaks to is that substance use disorder is a disability, and therefore housing can't be refused to somebody that's in that situation. One of the conversations that we often have is this isn't an either-or scenario. Now, what we recommend is an and approach. So if first housing is a better option for somebody, you know, given the criteria, then that's an opportunity. But what we want people to have the ability to choose is if they want to be in an abstinence-based environment, you know, with recovery support services, and harm reduction is not the right model for them, then they have an opportunity to choose that housing as well. So the certification process, that's not a governing body. Those are recommended standards for a house to operate that have been, you know, I guess arrived at being seen as best practices, best case practices in this particular area of housing. And
great. Wendy, any? Thank you, Daryl. Anything you want to add, Wendy, before we move on?
No, I think Daryl covered it. Good job.
Fantastic. All right. Here's another question. What about programs that use a secular harm reduction model? And Daryl, I'm not sure. I think you may have just kind of touched a little bit on this. Can they be certified?
The NAR standard is it's an abstinence-based model. And so if there's an individual that's chosen to want to live in an environment that doesn't, that doesn't have a harm reduction element, then this is the option for that individual based on the NAR standard. The way that we see, it's not that harm reduction isn't a successful model for some, but for some individuals to be in an environment or a community where somebody that was a heroin user is now just using marijuana is not a healthy environment for them to be in, because there's a recovery program that's been chosen, not just reduction or the change of whatever the substance use is. So we don't certify harm reduction homes, but we don't certify first housing homes either. These are homes that are abstinence-based programs, primarily either 12-step or faith-based in nature.
At the same time, I see a related issue. I see several questions and comments about dismissing residents based on recurrence or relapse. And NAR does have a standard and ethics code about that practice, and we support always the resident having a plan upon unplanned exit or discharge. And so it's not ethical or within the standard to put somebody out on the street.
That was great, Beth. Thank you. And Daryl, thank you for the response as well. I think this kind of hinges on what you just said, Beth. And there's a question about, is there any research around a more therapeutic approach to recovery homes? Many of the homes I've worked with are very punitive. One slip and the individual has, in some cases, 15 minutes to leave the property. Are there models with a less punitive approach?
NAR absolutely does not support that concept. I mean, we are looking at this from a disease model, first of all, and then the goal is, remember, we're trying to build recovery capital, not tear folks down or set folks up for self-destruction. So our goal is, I talked about the drug screening in the house earlier for certain levels, and that is about not using a screen to be punitive, but you're trying to use that another way of gauging where someone's at, where you can at that point intervene and help. So it may be a referral to a higher level of care or something like that, not this concept of putting people on the street. So
I think the follow-up comment it looks like Noah asked the question, is exactly what Wendy said. If somebody has a zero tolerance policy, and so there isn't X number of relapses allowed for a particular resident, if the resident is interested in continued recovery support services, then the operator has an obligation to find a fit for that individual in a program that would be helpful. So hopefully, if there's somebody that is being seen as punitive, that it's only half of the story. That it isn't, well, you didn't fit here, therefore best of luck to you. Hit the bricks. It's let's talk about what happened, and let's see if we can get you get you additional care that would be useful and helpful for you.
That was fantastic, and Wendy, your response was great. Beth, any final comments before we move on?
No, let's hit the next question.
All right. So I'm going to keep us in this vein for just one more question. What are some resources to help maintain individuals with co-occurring disorders and with addiction into supportive, independent living housing?
Well, I think when we talk about co-occurring, we are talking about most of the residents that we serve. It's my experience and data shows that the vast majority of those that are in our homes have some co-occurring diagnosis. So it is our responsibility as providers to become educated. And another great reason to come to the summit, we do a lot of education in that summit through webinars like this. Seek out opportunities for you, your staff, to be trained in co-occurring. We have to be educated. That is what makes us professional and give good service to our residents.
Fantastic, Beth. Any other comments? Okay, I'm going to move us on. Should Joint Commission or CARF accreditation be required for recovery housing? If not, why not?
Go ahead, Daryl.
So, so JACO is a standard that's typically used by hospitals. It's a healthcare standard. CARF is often used by behavioral health treatment facilities. The cost of those is often one of the prohibitors. That oftentimes the recovery house has a small staff and is not a larger organization and can't withstand the cost of not only getting the policies and procedures and all the other pieces in place to get accredited by one of those organizations, but to maintain it. So, my organization is preparing to go down the road of CARF accreditation, but it's a unique sized organization. I think that the NAR standard is not meant to replace either one of those, and there's an appropriateness with each one of those standards. But we wanted the NAR standards to be accessible to different sized organizations, so that the cost wasn't a prohibitor for somebody improving the quality of care that they offer.
And I think that CARF accreditation is great, but it paints with a broad brush that doesn't, that is more than really the scope of recovery residences under NAR. And to your point, Daryl, I think that if it were required, it would knock out most operators, because most operators are small to mid-size.
Great. And Wendy, any final comment before we move on?
No, I think I would piggyback the same. NAR serves a different purpose than Joint Commission and CARF. I agree.
Got it. Perfect. All right, folks. This is an interesting question, and I heard something about this yesterday in a discussion around California, and it was in conjunction with something that Ryan Hampton had posted in social media. What are your thoughts on Florida? And I'm not sure that this is the right term, but I'm just going to use it. It says, on Florida rebuking legislation, and I think that probably means that they actually remove some legislation on recovery housing certification. And how will this affect other states? Do you have any thoughts on that, folks?
Well, Florida was such a trailblazer for recovery residences and standards, and still there you will hear nefarious things and reports coming out of Florida as far as things like patient, or in our case resident brokering, toxicology. All of those things have been legislated out in Florida. They are illegal, and FAR, the Florida Association under NAR, has done just a stellar job facilitating that legislation. It really was the Wild West in so many ways 5 years ago in Florida, and that has been largely cleaned up in that area of the country.
Great, Beth. Thank you. Daryl or Wendy, anything to add?
No.
Okay.
Good job.
Great. Okay. There are a lot of overdose deaths when people leave recovery housing. What system support can be provided at this crucial time?
One of the things we talked about was increased capacity. You know, the adage that nothing changes if nothing changes. So if, you know, right now we have 85% of our jails are filled with nonviolent alcohol and drug offenders. And in my state of Indiana, 70% of that number recidivize if they aren't provided with some treatment or recovery support services. So there's a discussion around the, you know, the cost to warehouse people and you know, the public health and the public safety cost and all the economic impact that it has. But at the end of the day, you know, we know that warehousing people doesn't address this issue. We know that we can't build enough prisons to outpace it. So I think we have to go back to the fundamental pieces of, you know, we need to provide more services. And rural communities have challenges, you know, around some of that, no different than in the healthcare system. But if you take a look at this relative as a chronic disease, and you start talking about what are the pieces necessary in recovery-oriented systems of care from a capacity standpoint and or availability, then you can begin to get closer to answer that question.
Got it. Beth or Wendy, anything to chime in on?
No, I wanted to talk about the standard on that there is a standard that requires all levels of recovery residences to be equipped with naloxone. And so there is that mechanism to help us ensure some degree of safety in the opioid reversal medication of naloxone.
I guess, Steve, the other comment I'd make is I see questions around MAT.
We're going to, yep.
So the operation that I run is a 57-year-old organization, and there's an addictionologist that sits on our board, and for a very long time we did not allow medication-assisted treatment here. And he asked a question one day that was a game changer for me. He says, well, you know, I want to show you some research, and if 10% of the folks that came into the facility, if you knew that 10% or less of them, if they were opioid users, were going to be successful in staying in recovery without some form of MAT, would you continue to accept them? And that, you know, that caused a lot of reflection. And I thought we either need to provide the safest environment and not pretend to be doctors and or scientists, or we need to quit accepting somebody that we're only giving a 10% likelihood to succeed in. So, you know, the overdose piece and the opioid epidemic is a game changer, you know, because of the one and done dynamic that's there. Now, because of the concerns, and I saw questions about Suboxone or buprenorphine, because of the concerns around diversion and the fact that there's street value with that medication, it has to be done with care. You have to have the appropriate level of staff to be able to manage those pieces. So it isn't as easy as, you know, should or shouldn't you. I think everyone would agree that you need to provide the best chance for someone to recover, but what are recovery houses capable of providing on a consistent and sustainable basis? You know, which is back to the question, is a level 4 better than a level 2? No. But if somebody, perhaps in a level 4, they might have the capability. So, you know, we have a medication room, and I have staff that has been trained in MAT, you know, administration and observation, and that's different than just giving, you know, somebody to go ahead to come and live in a level 1 or 2 house and say, hey, just do the right thing. So it comes back to capability, but that's one of the things. If you don't have, if there's a state or an area that doesn't have the capacity to meet the need of an MAT client, then that's a concern. Just like we were talking about housing first and abstinence-based housing, there has to be options for people. And this is an example of an option that's needed.
And I did want to call attention to a white paper that is under review at SAMHSA right now, written by NAR specifically on the topic of MAT in recovery residences. So that will be a helpful guide.
And I was going to say, I also added a resource, a reference for Ohio recovery housing, because there are some, there's a toolkit on there for some of the best practices in doing recovery housing with MAT services. We've been doing it in Springfield here at McKinley Hall for about 12 years, and it's been an evolving process and a learning process. But as Daryl said, you have to make sure you have the right level and the staff in place so that you can provide the service so that it, doesn't backfire. But it's certainly, we definitely see lots of people get well using that model.
So you guys, Daryl, that was probably the best answer I've ever heard to that question, and it was really informative. I mean, it even helped shape, my kind of my own perspective a little bit from your response. Thank you for that. And Beth and Wendy, I know that both of you understand this piece really well. I'm gonna pitch the final question here, and we probably have about 30 seconds each to chime in, and then we'll roll into the close. And it's going to be right around it. Daryl, I think you sort of started to answer this in your last question, but this individual is saying, listen, I understand level 4 and access to medication-assisted treatment, but what about the lower levels? All the ones near me have declined letting clients in because of Suboxone. And my sense is, and I'll check in with all three of you, but I think what I heard from you, Daryl, was it's not really an issue about the like level 4 is better. It's that level 4 has the access to that level of care that is required for medication-assisted treatment. And I just wonder if you guys can talk a little bit about that. Is that accurate?
So ultimately, the standards and our responsibility as providers is to ensure safety for those we serve as much as we possibly can, dealing with a disease like addiction. And so the lower levels, 1, 2, and 3, might not have the resources to create safety around Suboxone. And that's really the only reason not to admit a Suboxone resident. The only reason is because there aren't resources in place to ensure that safety.
Fantastic. So, folks, with that response from Beth, that brings us to just about the top of the hour. I want to thank Daryl, Wendy, and Beth for an incredibly knowledgeable presentation with just tons of information. I want to remind everybody that in October, that there's a slide up on your screen right now, the 2018 Best Practices Summit for NAR. And as Beth has pointed out, lots and lots of goodies around implementation and the standards piece. So, if you can make it to the NAR Summit, I think it will be well worth your while. As we close, I just, thank you. There was a lot of people here today. I'm grateful for all the questions and comments, and the chat box is really active. A link to a satisfaction survey is going to pop up when we close this meeting room in about 30 seconds. Takes less than 3 minutes to complete. Give us the feedback. We want the good, bad, and ugly. Everything you tell us, we look at because we want to make this a better event for all of you. If you've got any additional questions, put them in the satisfaction survey. And don't forget, we're here for technical assistance at any time. You can find our TA form on the Brass Tacks website. And we look forward to serving your TA needs. I want to thank everybody for joining us today. Thank you again to our 3 presenters, and I hope you all have a fantastic